Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast Thinking with T. On this episode of Thinking with T, I'll be bringing you the concluding part of my interview with Saskia Hoffman. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed recording. Thank you. Mm. Okay. You also talked about I think in one of those other posts, maybe I posted something and then you responded. I think yourself and then a couple of people I've spoken to as well, sort of implied or said the same thing about
Mm,
the part of history not being taught in schools. I mean, the complete European history, so to speak.
yeah.
In the UK, for instance, the what I was told was that they talk about the Tudors, the wars and all of that, and then they skip the age of imperialism, the 400 years in between, when
Wasn't a long time at
the,
all, was it?
and then jump down to the World War and how Britain
Yeah.
saved humanity and all of that. And so there's no complete teaching of the entire history in such a
Mm,
way that people understand that we did some very great things. Yeah, no doubt. I think that the UK has really done some very, especially and other countries as well, has done some very great things in the world, being at the forefront of
yeah.
certain developments. But however, you must also talk about the baggage.
Mm, yeah.
So, what's your thought on that, anyway?
I think I agree. I think from a German perspective, our baggage is two world wars, so that is where our history focus is, understandably. Um, Germany hasn't messed up as much when it comes to colonialism as the UK. And
Yeah, I
I
think when
do
Germany started the adventure was when the World War started, and then France took
exactly.
over
We
their
were too
colony.
late. For once, I'm
Yeah,
happy that we were too late. But but I remember. I mean, we had it in history a bit, and we've recently been to Namibia, which was a German colony.
yeah,
Um, and reading the history there, you're like, wow, okay, we might not have been in many places, but we're in Namibia. There's a lot of things that I mean, so many people were killed because of the Germans wanting to take over there. And I don't know if that is being taught enough in school. For me, I can tell you my memory of school history is definitely Second World War. And
yeah,
maybe that makes sense because what happened there from a German perspective is horrendous. And yeah, it's something that Germany is still struggling with. And it should not be forgotten. It is a difficult one to keep balance. I find to make sure that all things that happened in history are being looked at equally, and not just one being focused on. And so the Europeans focus on the European history for sure. But for example, question to you: How much do you learn about African history in Nigeria?
in Nigeria, I hope I'm speaking for. I think there's not much of learning of history generally in Nigeria,
Hmm.
to be honest. And I was still speaking to, I was responding to someone earlier on social media today, and they're talking about the fact that racism, is skewing it as racism. That the fact that we still say that Mungo Park discovered River Niger. Now, River Niger is one of the longest rivers in
Mm-hmm.
Africa. I think it starts from modern day Senegal and then passes through Nigeria into the Atlantic Ocean. And so Mungo Park was a Scottish explorer who came there, and he actually died in that river on, I think, maybe his second or third expedition. He
Yes.
actually wrote a book about it, and he was writing for a European, for the British audience anyway, about his findings about the river. He did a lot of measuring the
Mm.
depth, the length of the river at various points, and a very scientific study of the river. So he's always been credited with discovering the river. And then the lady was saying, how could you have discovered something that was already there
Yeah,
since how long? And there had been people living along the banks of that river. You have so many communities formed along the banks of that river.
very
And then
true.
I said that no, this isn't racism. That this isn't what defines racism, but I think it's more of an indictment on the educational system
Yeah.
and the fault of those who write the curriculum. I mean, Nigeria has been independent of the British since 1960. So
Mm-hmm.
even if that was the curriculum that was inherited, I mean, you should have changed that since
Yeah.
50, 60 years now. So if you have not changed that, then questions should be asked of those responsible for that. But to go back to the question, yeah, is history being taught? I don't think history is being taught, and even when it's being taught, it's not being taught correctly. Those who developed the educational curriculum sort of adopted the what the colonial masters left behind. That's the
Yeah.
British people left behind, and for for some of those lessons, I don't think they have tried to make them as relevant to the Nigerian perspective as much as possible. Now, obviously, if I'm a British person, if I'm trying to describe the River Niger, I would describe it from the point of view of my Britishness, and you can't
Mm.
blame that person in that sense. However, now we should now how can we switch that around and say that okay, yeah, this guy did not discover River Niger. This was actually what he did, which is a much more balanced view of because personally I even feel is a big disrespect to the guy to say that he never even claimed that he discovered River Niger anyway. He just described what he saw to his own
Okay.
audience. So so in that case it's now left for which was my point to you on Facebook as well that Africa must at some point do the needful. You know what I mean? Uh, but again, history, yeah, history is not being taught. Is not being taught.
Mm.
I didn't really. Did I do history in school? I think there are people who do history as a subject, but you don't do it. It's not well taught in my
Mm.
opinion, and I think many people as well agree with that. There's a lot of gap in terms of knowledge as to
Yeah.
what's happened in Nigeria, even the post-colonial history in terms of
Yeah.
from 1960 up until date. There are people, students who wouldn't know who the first prime minister was, who what led to what, and sometimes it's why we repeat the same things because we are
Mm.
not being taught correctly. A lot of what I've learned has been through self-learning, just
Yeah.
being curious
I
and
imagine.
obviously not everybody will be interested in that because
No.
history can also be boring as well. But now back to now, let me now ask you now in terms of history because I know you try to read a bit of politics. Am I correct? Yeah, I've seen some of your contributions. You're a bit, yeah, very. Meanwhile, what was your background? What was your PhD on?
My PhD was food science, looking into tea and how we enjoy tea. So really focusing on our senses. Um,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, sensory. Yeah, I remember I used to do some testing in that lab,
Mhm.
sensory. Okay. Yeah, politics, history. You are very interested in politics and history and the African continent. I know we've had some conversations, here and there,
Yeah.
talking about African development and what have you. Uh, and from my own reading of history can be very brutal because it exposes a lot of the reading history or studying history from if you take away if one tries to be objective and look at things critically as against being a biased observer. So, for instance, if I'm Nigerian, I'll say that, oh, yeah, these people, they did very wrong,
Yeah.
obviously. And if I'm this one, I'll try to rationalize whatever I think I did wrong. Uh, but history can actually be very brutal because he exposes a lot of sometimes old ones that people would rather want to forget. So I'm just thinking maybe not much as a question. Do you think that's what's responsible for, history not being taught in that way? Maybe people just feel, yeah, if we forget, if we don't talk about these things, then we won't have to relive the horrors and maybe we'll have a better world for it.
I think if we forget, we are a lot more likely to make the same mistakes. Um, I think it's I think it's really important to know how things happened and what I mean for me history is also a way of understanding why we are in a situation now that we are. I mean if you look at Africa, right? And not that I've finished reading recent history in Africa, I think I'm still lacking like 30 years. But looking at
What era have you studied? What
I
period?
think starting, I mean, okay, only really starting when the whole independence kicked off in Africa. So
Okay,
I've not
post-independence
looked
Africa.
further
Okay.
back, not looked further back than that. Because having gone to Nigeria, it is, well, let me be honest, it's shocking. It's shocking to see a country in the 21st century still having so many areas where there is no running water, where there is no constant electricities, and that's places in Lagos. It's not countryside. And talking to Ola and hearing that yes, it was basically like that when we left 15 years ago, and you're like, why the heck does nothing change? Where what? So that's I think that's what pointed me to read a bit more about history, and I think we need to. I don't think it's right at all to forget what we've done. I think we need to understand what we've done. That is hurtful. From a from a German perspective, I think we know how painful it is to look back into history and to see what went wrong. And you look what happened in the Second World War as a German, and you're like, how could that ever happen? But I think these are questions we need to ask all the time and try to learn from it and try to not make these same mistakes again. And if for me, the sad thing with Nigeria not knowing on history not being properly taught in Nigeria is that when Nigerians then go somewhere else, they probably believe whatever they're being taught about their country or their country's history because that's the perspective that's the maybe the only perspective they have, and I find that quite dangerous.
Yeah,
The perspective they get is probably the one from the British if they go to the
yeah,
UK, right?
yeah. That's you're correct. You're correct. I think a number of Nigerian writers have. I don't know if you know Chimamanda.
Yes.
Chimamanda, she's probably the most popular one out of Nigeria right now. She had a talk on one of those TEDx or can't even remember the platform where she talked about the dangers of a single narrative or a
Exactly.
single story. So, for instance, on most European TV, British TV, all you see about Africa is usually war, poverty, and what have you.
Yeah.
Um, so, for somebody who that's all they get exposed to, that's all they'll see of the continent. But even though you see that a place like New York, for instance, there's so much crime there, but because we have multiple stories coming out of the US, we don't stereotype US as a violent place. Meanwhile, there's so much violence going on there. I mean, school shootings and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, but there's no single story. And
No.
you
No.
someone else also talked about, as long as the story of the aunt is being told by the hunter, it will always
Mm,
glorify. So I think that's what some of those early post-independence writers try to do, try to bring a much more African nuance or African voices to give them expression so that you'll hear a different perspective. The writer of Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe,
mm,
I think he's probably one of my favorite Nigerian writers ever. I think that's what he did with that book because he was able to explain, when you're talking about colonialism now, a lot of the available literature at the time was written by British administrators, British writers, who will always write from a much more British perspective of Britain coming into Africa to civilize, quote and unquote, the people.
Yeah.
But he then brought about a different view of, okay, what's the people that were affected, the Africans now, what were they seeing? How were they perceiving these things? I
Mm,
think that's what makes that book so powerful. I've read it so many times. I think it's a very important book.
okay.
But that said, I know you're a Christian as well. So how do you think that Christianity, as a religion or as a faith or however we choose to define it, what can Christianity do, in creating a much more equal world?
I find that a tricky one because from a personal point of view, I know that um, being a Christian, we are being taught that God made us to His image. So however way we look, that is an image of God. So you know the fact that we look different is meant to be, and it's a good thing, and we should appreciate that for it and not divide ourselves because of that. But that is personal. I think if you look at church and how we do church, church is not necessarily a place where we mix. Not necessarily, at least. I mean, churches are also places that are for years and years and years have developed in their individual countries, for example, and then these churches are very much also influenced by culture. So I mean, we've been together in church, right? I've been
Yeah,
going been going to a church where I'm the only white person. And yeah, but the thing is that so church is different, and culturally we are different. I mean, there's no pretending that Nigerians are the same as Germans. Culturally,
yeah,
the way we do church could probably not be further apart. But there's also things that we can learn from each other, and there sometimes I feel there is not enough willingness to be open and to maybe try things differently. And that's the same
mm,
for a black church as for a white church. And I think for because I am with a black guy and we are a mixed couple, going then to a church that is just white or just black is a bit odd, because it's basically whatever it is, one of us is the odd one, right? Now we are actually in a church that is mixed, that has both.
yeah,
We have black people, we have white people, we have people from the Filipinos, anywhere really. And for me, that is quite refreshing, because you still see cultures. You still see Nigerians in their Nigerian clothes on Sundays, and that's totally cool. And you see some of the Danes who are totally relaxed and wear clothes that would be an absolute no-no in a Nigerian church. But that's okay too, and it's accepted. And you kind of, for me, that's the beauty. You then learn and see, okay, we can do things differently, but still accept each other, and it's okay to do things differently, because actually we're all here to worship together.
yeah, yeah,
And when you are in just a black church and just a white church, there is only, or often there's only one way of doing things, the way we've always done it. And I was never a big fan of that sort of thing.
yeah. Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. I think that there should be a lot more willingness on both sides, people to kind of move in both directions. If you leave your position, if I leave my position, maybe we can meet somewhere at the middle.
Yeah,
And I think that should be the whole essence,
yeah.
really.
But I
Uh,
mean, on the other hand, I also know that church is a place where you feel home. So it's also a place where you want to see something that you're familiar with. So I can also understand why people stick to the church routines that they're used to, because it's a sense of belonging as well that you feel when you get that. So it's as usual with these things, it's always difficult to find the middle way that works.
yeah, well, in some places, in the church that we attend currently, it's really more of a mixed church, really. You had a lot of Nigerians, Ghanaians, Zimbabweans, obviously British people, white British people now, um, and different cultures,
Mm,
Indians, and so on and so forth there. So the Facebook Live video I was referring to, one of the things that the guy mentioned was the fact that even though you have those mixed churches, most times you'll always find that they are usually headed by the leadership is usually Caucasian,
mm,
and that it's almost impossible to find the other way around,
mm,
where you have a white um, congregation that's been led by, say, a black preacher. And
mm,
his position was that if you're going to talk about racism, then you must, those are subtle forms that well plays out in the church, and the church must be ready and open to dealing with it,
yes.
and in fact, I didn't realize at the time he said that was responsible for a lot of African churches springing up in the UK because you had many people who were gifted, who were called, but somehow weren't allowed to be in the leadership of those the established churches at the time. And yeah, they
Mm,
were welcome to fellowship, but you can't just be in the leadership. So well, that was
yeah.
what somebody said. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know about
Yeah.
it. I've not read, I've not studied that, so I don't know, but
No,
that
but
was
I
what
guess
somebody.
in general, British, I'm assuming the same as German churches are a lot more strict on who and how you get into a leadership position. Whereas my feeling is in African churches, it's maybe a bit more fluid, how people be involved. It's I think there's maybe a more bureaucracy involved if you want to get into a leadership team in a British and a white church. That's at least in Germany. It is a lot more. Mm, there are a lot more churches like the Church of England. So a lot more churches that are state supported in a way,
Think,
and not as many.
where you have a lot of orthodoxy in terms of, but
Ex-
should, but if we're saying, and I mean, from a Christian point of view now, if
mm,
one is saying that, yeah, there should be representation on the boards of,
mhm,
say, businesses. Then, if the church, which says that here we are more or less like the seat of morality, so to speak, in the society, we're kind of a moral voice in society, so to speak. If they are not showing that example, then why should we expect that businesses should do otherwise?
I mean, yeah, you got a point. The churches certainly have work to do on that as well. I'm not sure I agree with the church being seen as a moral point in Western societies.
Well, in Western societies, maybe not anymore, but
Exactly.
I mean, the what's his name? The Archbishop, is it Justin
How
Welby
come?
here in the UK here still? I think sometimes when he speaks, he still kinds of people still sort of respect his voice as, the voice of God kind
Yeah.
of speaking. Yeah, I get what you mean. Obviously, in the West is not really as but that still doesn't remove the place of the church, as a body of Christ. And I think that that's a Christian point of view anyway, whether the society accepts the
Yeah.
Christian point of view. Anyway, it's been nice talking to you, Saskia. Is there any other thing you'd want to say before we call it a day?
I think reflecting back on what we spoke about in the beginning, on
Yeah.
the white privilege thing, um, I think I think that there is definitely, at least for me personally, work that we need to do, work in terms of talking, and that needs to come from me as a white person who kind of has at least some sort of an idea of what it's like to be black. But I think it actually also needs to come from black people, because realize is that, and I can understand that, but it is hard for Black people also to talk about some of the experiences that they've had in terms of racism, in terms of, things not being the way they should be. So I think maybe also a thing that needs to be done on your side, not necessarily on your side personally, but you know what?
Obviously, the black community. Yeah, I
Exactly.
think people have been talking about some of those things. For me, I think that sometimes what you find is that the fact of the idea of being believed. So, for instance, if
Yes,
I
true.
say that, yeah, I didn't get this job because the general response tends to be, oh, spare me, probably you didn't do well, that's why you didn't
I
get the
know.
job.
Yeah,
So
I
once
know.
and if it's been going on for a while, generally the response will just be, you know what, let me just keep it in there and just not talk about it.
Mm,
But yeah, you're right. People shouldn't be afraid of to talk about racism when they confront
mm.
one.
And
You
the
know.
thing is, even if as a white person you probably don't believe it at first, if you have heard the same story from different people several times and over again, maybe at some point people are gonna be like, okay, this is weird. Somebody else has told me something like this before.
Mm.
So I mean, that is my hope. I know that people are gonna go like, oh yeah, no, but you're just playing the race card and all that things, I'm totally aware of that, but I don't know how else we can do something, that's the thing. And I'm at the point that I'm like, we got to do something. You said on the Facebook post that we need a strong Africa, and I'm like, yeah, totally, but that is just not
But
going to happen
before
overnight. What
before
are
that's
we going
going
to
to
do till then? Because it's not going to
okay.
happen tomorrow or the day after.
Yeah,
Really.
but on the long term, personally, I feel that's because if you look at the psychology of race, it boils down to power. I mean, if you go back to the 1300s, 1200s, there probably wasn't racism as we had it now. Racism was something that was invented more from the 15th century thereabout,
Mm,
one as a way to justify the slave trade, and then and it's gone on ever since. And even after the slave trade was abolished, unfortunately, you can't suddenly abolish 400 years of programming. Or, yeah,
oh no, no.
it lasted about 400 years. You
Yeah.
can't abolish 400 years of programming since just because you made a decree. People are still going on the same mindsets that have been passed on for 5 generations, 6 generations will still
Mm,
exist, and it will take a long time to and the point I was coming from was it's going to be hard to, and the fundamental assumption of racism is that yeah, this race is superior to this one,
mm-hmm.
just by being a member of this group. So and the examples people will keep pointing at will be that, oh yeah, if you're saying that what I'm saying is not true, how come your continent is like this? And well, there are so many factors that come into play. There's the geography, some people say it's a lie, but yeah, there's so many books about that. There's
Mm,
the geography, there's there's the legacy of slave trade itself,
yes.
that's contributed to the underdevelopment of the continent, as it were. So if you have all of those factors coming into play, the long-term solution should be an empowered Africa. If Africa gets it right, then you'd find that those examples, those ready examples that people use, suddenly disappears.
And are you
So,
hopeful that's going to happen soon?
well,
Because I,
well, you just have to be hopeful. I mean, you just have to, you just have to be hopeful because
mm,
honestly, for me, that's what it is. And unfortunately, you can't separate yourself from the color. Your color sticks out.
mhm.
So as long as you can be traced back to the continent, and there's that perception of disdain and uh, so much poverty in the continent and so much of, then it's going to keep coming back at you. It's like this guy talked about the tripod of respect. That what gives a man respect is his race, his country, and then his own personal achievement. So
Mm,
if you're from a powerful country, say you're from Germany or the US, that gives you some level of respect in the world.
yes,
And
it
if you
does.
are personally successful as well in your own career, yeah, that's another star mark.
Yes.
And then
And
or
then
if
you're
you're
white
black,
and you have it all.
if you're black and you're Obama, it doesn't matter what you do. Your people will keep questioning you. I mean, that
Yes.
guy was a freaking president, but
Yep.
he- so 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 on the long term, what's going to take that away? Obviously, it's not practical right now. It's not
Mm,
something that myself and yourself can solve or deal with. We have to deal with the ones that we can do as individuals.
yeah.
But it's just my own thoughts that look,
Mm.
at the end of the day, this must be the end game.
The thing is just, I think for me, it's such a long road.
In 1960, Nigeria was probably richer than South Korea.
Yeah.
Uh, Here we are,
Oh,
and
of course. I mean, the legacy in Nigeria,
uh,
I mean, as a particular country that at least I know a bit of, it's not easy with the tribes just then all of a sudden going like, oh yeah, now you're Nigeria.
yeah,
Now
the
please work
friends now
together.
you're in one country, you must live together. No, it's not gonna happen just because you put them
But it,
together. So those old rivalries are still there. What
but I
have you?
think for me that is the thing that is so difficult to see sometimes, that you go like, okay, if you look at Nigeria, if you look at other African countries, you're like, why are we not getting further with this? And then, funnily enough, actually, we went to um, Namibia and talking to some of the
Oh, you went to Namibia.
yes, went to
It's one of
Namibia
those
last
places I want to
October,
go to.
which is very
Yeah, was
different
it
to
work
Nigeria.
related or
No, no
just
pleasure, pure pleasure.
okay?
And talking there to some of the black Namibians, they were all like, "Oh wow, you to Ola, oh you're from Nigeria. Nigeria is amazing," and we are like,
Yeah.
"Well, your roads are certainly better than the ones we've seen in Nigeria. So guys, I think you're not bad. Please."
Nigeria has to be the US of Africa because the
MC
Americans have a
Nollywood.
way of selling themselves and making so much noise about themselves. Everybody thinks it's heaven, not realizing that
Yeah,
you know, yeah.
but
I
it,
think that's the general impression again because of the the entertainment industry in Nigeria is a
yes,
huge all over the continent, the movies, the music. So
of course.
people see these big flashy cars, big houses.
Mm.
Maybe they think everyone lives in big houses in Nigeria. Maybe what we need to do is to start putting that on CNN as well. So maybe it's going to change the perspective a little.
That's true. That would put on some nice Nollywood movies.
On the international media, yeah, that could,
Oh,
change
there are some on
people start
Netflix,
thinking.
so
Yeah, that's true. But well, if I was I think it's mostly Africans who actually watch Nigerian movies.
probably they are quite special
Do you watch
sometimes.
Nigerian movies?
Every now and then, they're quite funny.
Which one have you seen most recently?
Oh, it's been a while. I cannot remember a title. But as always,
Yeah,
I just,
there's
I mean,
one that just got I think something blood money or what was that thing?
I don't know. But for
I
me, I
can't
have to
remember
be
the
in the
name.
mood to watch Nigerian movies because there's always so much drama. So I need to be in the mood for that. If I'm not in the mood for that, I don't enjoy it.
Yeah, it was a wedding party up north. Yeah, I liked up north. I think I really liked that one. Living in Bondage is the one that just got there. Yeah,
Hmm,
Living in Bondage.
I've not seen
It
that
was
one.
an old story that I think just got reenacted. I think it was initially done in the 90s or early 90s or late
Okay.
80s. But they just did it again and then put it there. It's okay, but yeah, it was okay. But up north, I really liked up north. It's a way to really sell the country. Really, it showed a lot of the scenes, lovely sights and views, and you'll think you were somewhere else. But
Okay,
yeah,
maybe I should check that out then.
yeah, up north. That's
No.
north as in up. Yeah, we've said bye bye for
Yeah.
the last 30 minutes again. So yeah. So hopefully bye bye this time. Thank you so much, Saskia. It's been really, really, really nice talking to you.
There's
Then
just a lot to talk about, and I've been thinking about it so much. So it's nice to talk to somebody else, only other than to just Ola.
is Ola really, really interested in politics that way?
I mean, he's totally interested in politics anyway,
Okay, yeah.
and I think, yeah, I mean, he's also following what has happened in the US, and of course, I mean, yeah. So we talk about it a lot. Um,
Okay. Yeah,
but
that's good.
it's nice to always get a different perspective as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Thinking with T. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever platform you're listening on now, so you don't miss any of the exciting episodes coming up. Also, I'd like to hear your views as well, so do feel free to send me your voice notes or connect with me on Twitter. See you on the next episode. Bye.